Imagine an army with no real weapons, no tanks, no artillery, no thousands of soldiers, just artists, painters, designers, and actors, armed with nothing but creativity and deception. This is the story of the Ghost Army, the most unusual military unit in American history, and one of its greatest secrets. Act 1. The idea that changed the war. It was 1944. World War II was raging across Europe. The Allied forces were pushing back against Nazi Germany, but every step cost thousands of lives. American military commanders faced a desperate question. How do you protect real soldiers when the enemy is watching your every move? The answer came from an unexpected place. Not from a general, not from a weapons expert, from an artist. The United States Army created a top-secret unit, the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops. Their mission was unlike anything in military history. They would pretend to be an entire army. They would deceive the Germans into looking the wrong way, while real American soldiers moved safely into position. But who would carry out this extraordinary mission? The Army didn't recruit its toughest fighters. It recruited its most creative minds. Act 2. The men they chose. The soldiers of the Ghost Army were not typical warriors. They were painters, illustrators, set designers, sound engineers, actors, and advertising men. Many of them had studied at the finest art schools in America, the Art Students League of New York, the Philadelphia Museum School of Art. Among them were men who would later become legends. Bill Blass, who became one of America's greatest fashion designers. Ellsworth Kelly, who became a celebrated abstract painter. Arthur Singer, a famous wildlife artist. These men traded their paintbrushes and sketchbooks for a very different kind of canvas, the battlefield. They were young. Most were in their early 20s. They were creative, clever, and completely unprepared for war. But they had something no other soldiers had, the ability to create something from nothing, to make the impossible look real. Act 3. The Art of Deception. The Ghost Army had 4 main weapons, and none of them fired bullets. Their first weapon was inflatable tanks. The unit carried hundreds of rubber tanks, trucks, artillery pieces, and jeeps, all inflatable. They could set up an entire fake armor division in a matter of hours. From the air, from a distance, they looked completely real. German reconnaissance pilots photographed what appeared to be massive American tank formations that existed only in rubber and air. Their second weapon was sound. The Ghost Army carried powerful sonic equipment mounted on half-tracks. They had recorded the sounds of a real army. Tanks moving, soldiers marching, equipment being loaded. They could broadcast these sounds across 15 miles of open countryside. A German soldier listening in the dark would hear what sounded like an entire army on the move. What he was actually hearing was a recording played by a handful of men in a truck. Their third weapon was radio deception. The unit had skilled radio operators who studied the communication styles of real military units. Every radio operator has a unique style, a rhythm to how they tap the Morse code key. The Ghost Army operators could perfectly imitate these styles, making the Germans believe they were listening to radio communications from a completely different and much larger force. Their fourth weapon was the most dangerous and the most theatrical. They called it atmosphere. Small teams of Ghost Army soldiers would go into nearby towns and villages, wearing the uniforms and insignia of whatever real unit they were impersonating. They would drink coffee in cafes, talk loudly in public, and let information slip. False information, carefully designed to mislead German spies. These men were essentially actors performing a role, where the price of a bad performance was death. Act 4, Performances. Between 1944 and 1945, the Ghost Army staged approximately 21 deception operations across France, Luxembourg, Germany, and Belgium. One of their most dramatic performances came in March 1945 at the Rhine River crossing. The real crossing, Operation Plunder, was one of the most critical moments of the final push into Germany. To protect it, the Ghost Army was ordered to simulate a massive military buildup 15 miles away. They inflated hundreds of vehicles. They broadcast the sounds of an entire army. They jammed German communications. They sent their actors into the villages in false uniforms. The Germans believed them. Their attention was pulled away from the real crossing. When the actual Allied forces crossed the Rhine, they faced far less resistance than expected. Military historians estimate that the Ghost Army's deception at the Rhine may have saved as many as 15,000 American lives in a single operation. 15,000 lives. Saved not by bullets, but by rubber, recordings, radio signals, and acting. Act 5, the secret they kept. When the war ended, the men of the Ghost Army came home. And then they disappeared back into their lives. As artists, as designers, as ordinary Americans. Because the Ghost Army was classified as top secret, these men were forbidden from telling anyone what they had done. For 50 years, they returned to their studios and their design offices carrying a secret that no one could know. Bill Blass designed elegant clothing for America's most fashionable women and said nothing. Ellsworth Kelly painted canvases that hung in the world's greatest museums and said nothing. The men who had staged the greatest theatrical deception in military history went quietly back to their creative lives, invisible, unrecognized, uncelebrated. It was not until 1996, more than 50 years after the war ended, that the Ghost Army story was finally declassified. And even then, it took decades more before America truly began to understand what these men had done. In 2022, President Joe Biden signed legislation awarding the Ghost Army the Congressional Gold Medal, the nation's highest civilian honor. Many of the men who received it were in their 90s. Some had already died, never knowing that their country would one day say thank you. There is a photograph taken somewhere in France in 1944. A group of young American soldiers are sitting around a makeshift table. One of them is sketching in a notebook. Another is laughing at something off camera. They look like college students on a field trip. They were actually in the middle of a war. They were pretending to be an army to save the lives of men they would never meet. And when it was over, they would never be allowed to tell a single person what they had done. These were the Ghost Army, the painters and designers and actors who helped win World War II, armed with nothing but imagination, courage, and profound American belief that creativity, in the right hands, can be the most powerful weapon in the world. Fade to black. The 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, the Ghost Army, remained classified for over 50 years. In 2022, they received the Congressional Gold Medal. Most were over 90 years old. Their deception operations are estimated to have saved tens of thousands of American lives. They were artists. They were soldiers. They were ghosts.